Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Pitch Perfect, giving journalists what they want. My name is Paul Miller. I'm Head of Digital here at Vuelio. You might think you're listening into a Cision webinar. We are, of course, becoming Vuelio. I hope you've heard this. If not, you'll be hearing a lot more about it very soon. That's not what we want to talk about today, though, of course. And today, I'm not actually going to say a great deal, which is a relief to regular listeners, I'm sure. We're very, very pleased to welcome today Janet Murray, who's she's been working for 15 years across journalism, across public relations, across communications of all kinds, and is currently a key speaker, a trainer, consultant, guiding people's PR, bringing that sort of journalistic knowledge, that journalistic edge to it. She's going to be taking you through, how you can fine-tune your pitches, how you can fine-tune your relationships with journalists, how to create and develop those relationships to make the very most of your PR. And this is going to be a lot of practical advice, a lot of straightforward tips that you can bring into action straight away, as well as some long-term plans. As ever, we welcome your questions, we welcome your interaction. You should have a chat box there in the lower left-hand side of your screen where you can just pop in any questions. You can also tweet us. We're still on @CisionUK for the moment, changing soon, not during the course of this webinar. Still, if you've got any questions for us on Twitter, it's @CisionUK. Or indeed, as I say, use the chat box bottom left of your screen. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can at the end. If there's a natural break or it fits in very well, we'll get them. We'll try and take them live if at all possible. One further note: I'm going, because of Janet's actually in the Guardian offices today, and they have very stringent security over there. And so I'm actually going to be driving the slides today, which wasn't the original plan. So when you hear Janet say "next slide," it's not you she's talking to; it's me. Janet Murray, welcome, and take us away.
Hello, thank you. Just to say I'm covering for an editor at The Guardian this week, so there are the unusual presentations due to the fact that The Guardian firewalls seem to be particularly stringent, and we thought it was best just to kind of do it this way. So some of you might have come across me already. I'm a journalist with 15 years experience writing and editing for the Nationals. I work mainly for The Guardian these days, so some of you may have come into contact with me there as an editor and a writer on education, and also recently a lot more on business. But I've also been running a business, well, pretty much all of the time that I've been working as a journalist, helping people with training to understand how to pitch to journalists, how to get more press coverage, and also to help people with their writing as well. I also run a blog, a PR blog, helping people to understand how to get more press coverage. So do pop over there and have a look. There's lots of great content on there. And if you want to tweet along today, my Twitter handle is @Jan_Murray. So I thought this was a really, really great title for the webinar. Is your PR out of sync with journalists? And I'm going to start off and just say yes. I'm really sorry, that probably sounds like a negative way to start, but I've got loads of positive things to say and loads of positive advice, I hope. Yeah, I think that PR is very much out of sync with journalists these days, and it's something that I'm constantly trying to work on improving. I'm covering for an editor at The Guardian this week, and also for another week later in August. And I know that over this course of the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get hundreds and hundreds of pictures and press releases. And I, hand on heart, know that probably maybe 1 or 2 or 3 of them might be anywhere near the kind of thing that I'm looking for. So yeah, if that's the case, I'm looking for ideas. I'm desperate for ideas. I've got time. I'll tell you some of the horrible times that I've had trying to get stories and to try and get the right kind of content. If I'm getting hundreds of emails that are just ideas that are so unsuitable for the section that I'm working on, that I just would never run in a million years, something isn't quite right. Now that probably sounds a bit negative to start, but actually I think that there's kind of an opportunity. I really believe excuse me, that PR is about relationships and it's about understanding each other. And the more that PRs can understand journalists, the more that journalists can understand PRs, and maybe I admit we're not always so good at that side of it, then the better everybody's going to be. I've started talking recently about something called Soulful PR. If any of you follow me on social media, you might have heard me sort of start to talk about it. But I've been teaching people how to do PR in quite a specific, quite a different way all of the time that I've been doing it. I've only recently started to pull it together into something. And I call it Soulful PR. Probably sounds a little bit woo-woo, but actually it's just kind of about kind of relationships and respect and just kind of just taking a step back and really thinking about why you're looking for press coverage and remembering that you're dealing with people. I think often in PR, people end up almost forgetting that they're actually dealing with a person, that the journalist they're dealing with is a person with feelings and with opinions and ideas. And so this is what I'm going to talk you through today, really. If we could have the next slide, please, that would be great. So obviously half an hour is not very long, but I'm going to try and cover 3 broad areas: what journalists are looking for, and definitely what they're not looking for; how to get them to interact with you a bit more without being pushy or feeling too pushy; and also we're going to touch on how to write and deliver brilliant pitches to journalists. I'm going to show you some examples. We're going to do most of this through case studies, and obviously there's loads of great stuff on my blog if you want to go over and have a look afterwards, or even just have a browse through as we're talking. So next slide would be great. So this is what journalists want. This is a slide that I use. I use it at different presentations, but I do. You might have noticed that the Pope is in the middle. There is no reason why the Pope's in the middle. I just wanted to buy a picture of a big crowd of people. So this is basically what we want. We want stories that appeal to lots of people, and lots of people feel excited about, and they want to talk to their friends about, and they really care about. They're passionate about it. If you give me the next slide, I'll show you what we get. We get this. And in case you haven't worked it out already, this is navel gazing. Most of the pictures and press releases that I get sent and have been sent over the years are companies, organisations just saying, look at us, we're brilliant, we're doing this, we're amazing. And actually it's very, very rare that I would write or commission a story that's about one particular organisation. I mean, very occasionally that happens, but in the sort of run-of-the-mill day-to-day stuff, we don't generally write stuff about one organisation. It tends to be kind of more about trends or themes or that kind of thing. So as you can see, we don't really get anything near what we want. We want things that appeal to lots of people, but we actually get lots of inward-looking stuff, which is not what we want at all. So that's the first way in which journalists and PRs are out of sync. Next slide, please, would be great. I call these my heart sync stories. These are the kind of stories that I get pitched every day, and I actually, literally, my heart sinks a little bit. We have a new or successful product or service. We've won an award or a funding bid. We're moving into a new building or premises. Our company CEO has a great story. We're holding an event. Now, I'm not going to say for 1 minute that you can't get coverage for those kind of stories. What I am going to say is that if you send them as they are, just like that, we've won an award, we've got a new building, unless it's an amazing business, and this is an amazing business that's made out of chocolate or something. Everybody reckons that their company or CEO has a great and different story. If you send the stories just as they are on the screen like that, without any thought about how you're going to tailor them to a particular publication or for a particular journalist, you're probably not going to get very good results. It's a bit like it's like a real scattergun approach. It's like going outside, throwing loads of bits of paper in the air and hoping that one of them lands in the right place. And I see most of the pitching I do is around that. Is that kind of like, here it is, this is what we've done, you do the thinking, you try and work out what to do with it. Well, actually, we don't tend to have the time to do that sort of thinking, which sounds a bit awful, but it's kind of really busy. Like in most workplaces, when I worked at The Guardian, when I first started editing here, I was in a team of 8-10 people on the section. Now it's just me and a couple of subs who come in and help at the end of the week. Everybody's trying to do more things in less time, and I know you are too, but it's just worth being aware of that it's less likely these days that a journalist will kind of scan through your press release and just think, well, I don't really like that, but that's quite interesting. It's up to you to do the work. So let's have the next slide, please. So the result of going around with those kind of stories, just, yeah, we've got a new building, do you want to write about it? Yeah, we've won some money, do you want to write about it? Those kind of inward-looking stories. Essentially, this is what you're trying to do. you're essentially trying to put a square peg into a round hole, and guess what? It doesn't fit. So you go around with your story, you go around to a journalist on The Guardian, then you go to The Times, then you go to the BBC, and nobody's interested, because essentially that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to fit the same, a square-shaped thing into a round hole, and it just doesn't work because you're being inflexible. Could I have the next slide, please? So what I'm going to do is take you through my 3 principles of what I call Soulful PR. And really it's just about thinking about PR differently. And there's 3 aspects to it. The first one is service, the second one is sincerity, and the third one is simplicity. And I can just promise you, if you just take away some of these things that I'm going to talk to you about, you will see a difference. You will see better results. You will find your job just that little bit easier, I promise you. So could I have the next slide, please? I'm going to start talking about service. Okay, so what I want you to imagine let's imagine that you're going for a job interview over the next few days. What are you going to do? You're probably going to do your research on that company. You're going to find out the name of the person who's interviewing you. You're probably going to stalk them on LinkedIn. You might have a look at their Twitter profile. You might go on Facebook. And obviously they'll probably be doing the same to you. Because what you're doing when you go for a job interview is you're trying to persuade somebody. You're trying to say, look, I have got what you need. I have got the skills that you need. I have got the experience that you need. Give me a job. Give me a chance. Give me a chance. And essentially, I know you might not like to hear this, but when you're pitching to journalists, that's kind of what you're doing. It's like a job interview situation. They've got X amount of space or X amount of airtime. And you're essentially saying, yeah, we've got the credentials. You've got this space, you've got this job or this project, and we've got the credentials. We can give you what you need. Now, can you imagine, let's just go back to that job interview for a minute. Can you imagine just turning up to that job interview without having done your research on the company, without having done your stalking of the person that's going to be interviewing you, without thinking about the questions that you're going to be asked, without thinking about what you're going to say? You're not going to get that job. But every single day, and I see it with my own eyes, I see it in my own inbox, that's how people are working in the PR industry, or people who work in PR. They're going to journalists and pitching stories, and I know you've probably heard this so many times before, but I'm just trying to find a new way of putting it to you, without having done that really essential research. Just reading the publication, not just reading it, not just flicking through it and saying, oh yes, I've got an education story. The Guardian does education on a Tuesday. It's actually really looking at it and going, okay, we'll do education, but what kind of stuff do they do? Oh, I see they have a weekly interview. Oh, look, they have a comment piece every Thursday or whatever. So yeah, that's essentially what you're doing, and it's kind of disrespectful. If you're going to somebody, if you turn up to a job interview and you haven't done your research and you haven't done your stalking bit, it's kind of disrespectful, and no wonder people don't want to give you a job. So I know that probably sounds like a hard truth, but that's the way it is. And I actually feel when I look in my inbox and I see somebody sent me just such a wacky idea that's just so off the wall, and it's quite clear they've never read my section, or they've never even looked at it, I just think, oh. And even when, like Education Guardian, for example, which I'm editing at the moment, a lot of people, they send pictures, stories that are aimed at parents. Well, we don't. I mean, parents do read the section, but we never do things that are kind of 20 tips to help your child get ready for university or whatever. We never do that kind of content. And if somebody had actually read it over a week or two, they would know that. So when somebody comes with something that's just so off the mark, you just think, really, come on, the least you could have done is read it. So the first thing about service. When you do your PR from a place where you're thinking about service to journalists, I know some of you have probably had some bad experiences with journalists, and you're probably thinking, oh, I don't want to think about service to journalists. Journalists are nasty. But I promise you, they will be less nasty if you think about it this way. So if you think about your job as being service to journalists, giving them what they want, giving them what they need, understanding them, and you think about also service to the wider world as well, getting stories out there that make a difference to people's lives, that people want to talk about, that make them happy or make them, that make them feel something in some way, you're going to have a much better, much more success. So what I put on the screen at the moment is a flat plan, and I'm always amazed how many people in PR haven't seen one of these unless they've come from a journalism background. This is a flat plan that I've got from one of the times I was covering at The Guardian. As you can see, when I'm doing the education pages, well, you probably can't see, it's a little bit blurry, but I think it's the third row down. I think I've got a couple of pages there. And essentially, the reason I want to show this to you, and I often show this at training, is that you're just filling boxes. What I'm doing when I'm here is I'm filling boxes. So I've got 5 or 6 boxes, the same boxes every week that I have to fill. And I have to fill it with content that's really, really great for our section and for our audience. So it really is just filling boxes with every week. It's different content in the same size boxes, if you like. So someone will come to me and they'll pitch, I don't know, an opinion article or something like that on schools. This is just an example. And if they've read the section over 5 or 6 weeks, I know we never do opinion articles on schools. I don't really know why, but we don't do it. There isn't a space for that. And they'll insist and they'll argue and they'll say, oh, but this person's really interesting or this is really great. So, well, actually, that's brilliant, but we don't do that. We don't have that box. We don't have that school's opinions box. Somebody might come and they might say, you know, do you want to do an interview? Do you want to do a 60-second interview with somebody? Well, we don't have a slot for that. We don't have a box for that. So essentially, it's about you really looking at the publication and trying to understand what those content boxes are. It's the same for broadcast as well, trying to understand what those 10 or 15-minute segments are, trying to understand what goes in them and think, okay, what have we got that's not the same topic, because that's what people make that mistake a lot. You know, if I write about apprenticeships, I can guarantee hundreds of pictures about apprenticeships and obviously why would we do a story about apprenticeships the next week if we've already just done one? But it's thinking about what kind of content. You know, I've noticed that every week there's one story that's 1,500 words long. It's usually this kind of thing. The second story is normally about 1,200 words long, and it's normally, that one's normally on universities or whatever it might be. And it's kind of just really noticing those subtle things. And the more that you notice that and you think, okay, well, I can really see that this is the kind of stuff that they want to put in their boxes, the better you're going to be. That's your kind of service to journalists. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk you through a story that I pitched and successfully placed recently, which has nothing to do with education. It does happen to be for The Guardian, but it's for The Guardian's Women in Leadership section. And this article has done really well. It's really gone down well with people. This is an article about why leaving my business behind was the best thing that I ever did. It was a first-person opinion piece. So what did I do? So I decided I had something to say for that section. I wanted to get some coverage in the Women in Leadership section because I thought that would be good for my business. And so this is what I did. This was my research. So I went to the Women in Leadership section and I had a look at the kind of things that they did and thought, okay, why academia needs emotional, passionate women. I've been viciously attacked for daring to start a women's tech site. And basically I just looked at the kind of content. It sounds really obvious, but I looked at the kind of content that they've been running recently. I thought, okay, they do lots of first-person pieces, with a kind of strong line from women, things that people are going to care about. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. Can we move on to the next one? Brilliant. Actually, I think that's the same one. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, and then I had a closer look at some of these articles. So why women-only initiatives are vital for the arts. Can we move on to the next one? When I started working in technology, I could count the number of women on one hand. Can we move on to the next one? Why academia needs emotional, passionate women. So basically, I started having a look, not just at the fact that they ran first-person comment pieces by women around the subject of leadership, but I started to look at the kind of top lines that I thought would appeal, the kind of things that would appeal to that audience, the kind of things they'd be interested in. And if you could move on to the next slide, that would be great. And also what I did, which I think something people don't do enough, is I just went and had a look at the most popular reads on women in leadership. And I saw that article about why academia needs emotional, passionate women was the top one. I've been attacked for daring to start a women's tech site. So again, I was trying to get a sense of what was popular with that audience, what would resonate. Could we move on to the next slide, please? And okay, and this is my pitch that I sent. Hopefully, it's not that clear on my screen here, but hopefully you can see it okay. So this is slightly different for me because I know Harriet Minter, who's the editor, so I was able to do a little bit of an intro line explaining who I was. But I get straight in there. I was wondering if you'd be interested in me writing a blog post for you on how you don't need staff or an office or payroll to feel like a leader. My top line is just in that first sentence. There's no background, there's no preamble. Because I knew there was a connection, I did sort of throw that in at the beginning. But in that line there, that second line, that's my top line, that's my headline for the piece. Then I give a little bit of background, and then at the end, and if you just notice my tone, I'm a really experienced journalist. I've been doing this stuff for 15 years, but I don't presume for a minute that how it's going to like my idea, it was going to be perfect for audience. I've tried my best to understand it, but I know it might not be quite right. And you'll see actually it isn't quite right in the example. And at the end, is this something you might be interested in? And then I also show her a couple of things that I've done that are similar. So it's all about trying to please her. It's all about trying to please her. It's all about trying to give her what she needs. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, that would be great. You can see the response. She immediately gets back and says, yes, love your idea. Then we have a bit of a chat about how I'm going to do it, and I'm still going back going, is this the kind of thing you want? Is this the kind of thing you want? It's all about pleasing her because she knows her section is what she wants. If we could move on to the next slide, please. This was the final product. As you can see, I pitched letting my staff go made me feel like a real leader. They came up with something much better. Walking away from my business taught me the true meaning of success. That was so much better, because she really understands her section. She really understands what she's looking for, and I think that's such an improvement on what I pitched. But essentially, that whole pitch was about me trying to please her, and it was about me trying to please her and her audience, and trying to show that I'd sort of done my homework, trying to show that I tried to understand what she looked for, and actually putting in it only took me about 10 minutes to do that research. But that 10 minutes, people often say, I haven't got the time to read the publications that I pitched to. I haven't got the time to try and understand them. That 10, 15 minutes I spent looking around, reading other stuff that was similar, was so invaluable. I got a yes by return. And people often say, well, that kind of coverage is not great. There's only one line in there that's actually PR for my business, which is when I talk about what I actually do. And I've got a little bit of a link to my website at the bottom. But in terms of positioning me as a kind of, I just got so much positive response online and on Twitter and social media from that particular article, even though there was only the tiniest mention of my company and what I do. And sometimes getting great PR is about, again, in the service side of it, it's about compromising the need for that massive big plug. It's almost just about positioning you or your client out there as somebody that people think is really credible and that they like what you've got to say. So I'm conscious of time. I always tend to overrun, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide. And yeah, you can just see some of the responses that I got there. Real great engagement. Okay, very, very quickly, moving on to the next slide. The three things that I think motivate people to read, watch, or listen to something. It's fear, curiosity, and what's in it for me. And if you go on, I would say to people, I've got this thing I talk about called the BBC homepage test. If you're wondering about whether your idea is newsworthy, if you're wondering whether your pitch is any good, go and have a look at the BBC news page, homepage. Can we just flip forward a couple of slides to that? So this is a screenshot of, I think it was yesterday or Sunday night I took this, you can pitch all the story you like about your new building or your funding bid that you've just won, but this tells you what people are interested in reading. There's very important things happening in the world at the moment, but number two, McDonald's testing breakfast shake-up. There's going to be a new McDonald's breakfast. That's what people are interested in. So what I'm saying to you is not that your stories have to be worthy of the BBC homepage every time, but when you look at the kind of stories that are most read online, they're often things that kind of provoke our fear. So it might be something about an accident or killer bees or whatever, curiosity. So I remember I was speaking at a conference last year and terrible things were happening in Syria at the time, but what was the most read story on the BBC homepage? It was about a goldfish that was having a life-saving brain operation. And the what's in it for me factors, most of us read things because we've got some kind of affinity with it, we have an opinion on it, or we don't. So when you're thinking about pitching ideas, I often say to people, just kind of, go and look on the website that you're pitching to, of the publication you're pitching, just see what is most read and most shared. Then that will help you get inside the editor's head, because that's what they want to commission. They want to commission things that other people are going to talk about and they're going to care about and they're going to talk about on social media and that kind of thing. So if your story doesn't really fit into that category, you're not going to get commissioned. So moving on to my second point is sincerity, and that's about pitching stories that are from the heart. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Just very, really quickly, I want to talk about somebody, Belinda Palmer. She runs a company called Lady Geek, and she is brilliant at getting PR. Go and look her up after this. And the reason I think she's brilliant at PR, basically what she does for a job, some of you might know her, is that she certainly started off advising big companies, big tech companies, on how they could how they could help women and get more women to buy their stuff. Now what's happened is she now talks about empathy. I think she helps big companies be more empathetic, something like that. Her business has changed a little bit. But she is brilliant. Can we have the next slide, please? She's absolutely brilliant at getting PR. She gets there she is in Stylist magazine, there she is in the Telegraph, there she is in the FT. And what you'll notice if you look at those stories is none of them are about her business. She's never pitching stories about her business. All her stories are about the fact that she's got an opinion. She's got these wider missions and values which are generally about getting girls into tech, about getting companies to be more empathetic, about the way that women are treated when they go and buy tech, that kind of thing. She started her business because she had a really bad experience in a mobile phone shop. That's a story that she brings out again and again, and you read it in all the media stuff, but it's sincere. It comes from the heart. And again, compare that from when you're trying to pitch stuff about your new funding bid. So, maybe think about your clients, or think about the people you're working with. Instead of constantly trying to pitch news about stuff that's happening, what are your vision and values as an organisation, or your client's vision and values? Could you be out there talking about those? Because when you're talking about what you stand for, you're much more credible. Journalists are going to be much more interested in what you're doing. If you're doing things that are about what you stand for, rather than just trying to flog your latest product, as a byproduct of that, you'll get great PR. And I wish I had more time to go into this with you, because I'm really just scratching the surface, but I thought it would be better to show you that through an example. Could we move on to the next slide, please? And I don't know if you remember this story. So this was the Chinese firm that sent 6.5 employees on a French holiday. This got press everywhere. The reason it got press was because it was about this guy's vision, his values, about his mission, about what drove him. It wasn't about, oh, come and buy our new holidays. It was about, I think there's a travel firm, weren't they? It was about, this is the way I do business. And that is, I think, so much more powerful PR. The very last thing to think about is simplicity. So moving on to the next slide. And all I want to say on this one is it's just when you're pitching is, if you can move on to the next slide, I'm just going to show you again my pitch to Harriet. It's about being really simple in your subject header, really clearly labelling it up. You'd be amazed how many press releases I get that don't say that it's a story idea. I'm desperate for stories. Journalists are. We want stories. We love your stories. We want you to help us with that. So if you can label it up so that we know what we're getting. Clever headlines are not good. So let's say that you work for a breakfast cereal company or something, and you try and be clever and put crunch time or something like that, or company milks the profits or something. That might sound clever. You might feel proud of your nice pun that you've made, but a busy journalist is not going to have any idea what your story is about. So the key thing is to make sure it's Ron Seal, what it says on the tin. Get your top line in the first line of your email, and if you've crafted a really great email pitch, then when you get on the phone to a journalist, you're going to be able to do exactly the same thing. You're going to be able to nail it in a single line if you've worked on that. Don't give people background. Don't feel the need to explain, let me give you the whole history of our company. No, we don't want that. We just want the top line. We're interested in the stories. We're not interested in your company. We might be if your top line is good. So just getting to the last slide now. This really is just a dip into some of the things that some of the things I believe about PR and how we could all approach PR in a better way. So to sum up, it's about making sure that you're thinking about service. So you're not just thinking about getting a plug for your business. You're thinking, how can I actually help the journalist out? How can I make their life easier? Help them get home earlier because I've sent them a great story. It's about sincerity, stories that come from the heart rather than stories that you've manufactured. It's about sharing, thinking about building stories around your company's mission and values and what you believe in rather than just what you're doing. And it's about simplicity always. Now I'd love to have more time. I don't know if you could just move it on to my final slide, please. I'd love to have time to explore more of this with you, but obviously I've already gone slightly over time. So if you want to get in touch with me, there's all my details there. So I can see quite a lot of you. I'm very pleased my Twitter feed looks really busy. So it's Jan_Murray. You can go to my Facebook page as well and chat to me there, or send me an email. It might take me a little while to get back, particularly this week because I'm editing this week, but I will get back to you, especially if you label it up that you were on the Vision webinar. I will try and get back to you. And my blog is full of free resources. on all of this stuff. So if you want to go there and have a browse around, I've got some really popular stuff that I've had recently. There was one on how to do PR if you're an introvert. I've had some stuff about why I won't write press releases for people. They're some of the most popular ones recently. One of my most popular one is 49 words that you shouldn't use in your press releases. So there's loads there, hopefully, that you will find useful. So yes, I've run over slightly.
But I think that's good. Janet, can we keep you on the line for 5 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, sorry, I always run over. I'm really sorry.
No. It's really good, and I think but obviously we are not going to get through all the questions we've had. As you said, I think there's an awful lot coming on Twitter. There's an awful lot coming through on the webinar system here. So I'm just going to see if I can pick off sort of 3 or 4 here to get through. If that's all right, if we can keep you for five more.
Yeah, sure.
All right, fantastic. So we've got a couple of questions here, kind of related to obviously the plan that you were showing, and I think that's sort of that. As you say, a lot of people haven't seen that, and I think it sparked a lot of interest. So it's sort of related to that, and a lot of questions were coming up around this time. We had Nicola, for example, asking about sort of the more traditional kind of future features list. Is that something that all publications are going to make available? How do people get hold of those things?
I think some publications still have forward features lists, but I think particularly now so much stuff is online, and people are under pressure to produce things and get them on the web really quickly. I think you're almost missing a trick if you're concentrating too much on that forward feature stuff. And I think for industry magazines that can work really well. But I think increasingly your nationals and your consumers, they've got a really kind of lively web presence. They want to be getting stories up every day. So the more that you know about how they work and what kind of stories they run, that's going to be better than any forward features list that you can get your hands on.
And Mike, also related here, Michael is asking about, again, related specifically to that plan, is it unreasonable to actually contact the journalists and just ask what they're trying to fill and work that way?
Yeah, they may not. Here, I always answer the phone because I'm always interested to see what people are pitching, to be honest. But most of the journalists here, they don't answer their phones because they're busy. They're writing stories. They're not trying to be funny or anything, but particularly in the afternoons, they're writing stories. I think it's always fine to ask. When I do training courses, one of the exercises I set people sometimes is just give them a publication, go and ring and find out how far ahead they were, go and find out who the features editor is, and honestly about 6 times out of 10 they'll come back and go, oh my god, I've just been on the phone with the features editor and they told me this and they told me that. Often it's fear that stops us actually picking up the phone and just asking. And yeah, you might get the odd journalist who's a bit grumpy with you, but for every journalist that you get that's a bit grumpy, you probably get someone friendly or a friendly editorial assistant who will tell you how far ahead they work, what kind of stuff they're looking for. A lot of journalists can be a bit grumpy about it. They're like, just read it or whatever. But if you're just willing to just kind of let that sort of wash over you, you can actually get some really quite good information about what they're looking for. Nobody will share those. I'm not even sure I should share it, to be honest. No one will share those flat plans with you. They're not going to say, here's a flat plan for the next week or whatever. But something I get people to do in my trainings, I actually get them to do flat plans. So I will give them a copy of a magazine and go, right, flat plan that for me. Here's the last 3 months, flat plan it for me. And then they go, oh look, they have a regular interview feature. Oh look, they have a regular opinion article with a business leader. Oh look, and then you start to see those patterns and you start to think, oh, okay. So the more you can think about a journalist, you can flat plan a magazine yourself or a newspaper to get a sense where those regular sections are and how many pages a particular section is. You can do all of this stuff yourself, but if you rang up and said, someone at the Guardian, will you give me your flat plan? I think they'd probably tell you where to go. That's just an old one that I had sitting around, but that I've shared.
And we're very glad that you did. Sue Meaden is asking about pitching journalists on Twitter. If they're using an account for work purposes, is that a signal that that's a good way to reach them?
Yes, definitely. I got a really lovely story from a couple of girls. It was a mentoring scheme, and a couple of girls who had no clue about the media. They just set up this really, really nice mentoring scheme. They just sent me a tweet, had a look at what they were doing. I just rang them up straight away and said, it sounds really good, and it was a story. What I would suggest you probably don't do is, I have had before where I've been pitched by somebody, and then you notice that they've pitched every other education correspondent, and you go through and you're like, oh, right, okay, well, this is not an exclusive. So it's probably better to just tweet them, so I've got a story idea for you, can I DM you, or something. But yeah, definitely. I often will respond quicker to things on Twitter because there's probably less to respond to as your email inbox, and just sometimes just looks so overwhelming that you know you've got loads of emails to reply to, and you're not sure how you ever can. Whereas a tweet sometimes I think can be better. Just don't give your story away to everybody.
Is that I'm just is there a way of sort of telling via your Twitter activity when you're sort of uncut? I mean, if there's no Twitter activity, does that mean I'm busy, don't contact me? It links into another question here by Joe Townsend, who's asking what's the best time to call a journalist?
It depends.
So how do you,
yeah. It depends on the publication. So here at the Guardian, like the news reporters, they go into conference. I think it's 10:30 in the morning. Then they go off and they pitch their stories to the editors, and then they're working on them. Probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon might be a terrible time to pitch somebody here, but maybe 5 or 6 might be good because they filed their stories and they're now thinking about the next day. But it does depend from publication to publication. On a lot of it's kind of common sense if you think about it. On a daily, that's probably common sense. On a radio show, you probably want to pitch on the hour, and they're doing the news, on the quarter of the hour, that kind of thing. It's just thinking about, I do the paper review on my local radio, Radio Kent, and it's a morning show, and it goes off there at 9 o'clock, and then they all go off and meet for the next day to talk about the next day. And so it's just kind of sometimes using your common sense and just thinking, well, what would be a bad time to call and what might be a good time. I often find Education Guardian, we go to press on a Friday, and at the end of Friday I'm often sitting around just waiting to pass proofs. So that's a time when if somebody sent me an idea for next week, that might be a time that I might actually be like, oh, actually that's quite interesting and that'll save me a job next week. But it is about just sometimes using your common sense and just trying to find out, and it is unfortunately different on all publications, unfortunately.
And even within individuals, within those schedules as well, I guess they have a little bit of freedom left. There's tons of questions coming in. No surprise there. Keep them coming. We will get round to them one way or another. We're going to try and squeeze in a couple more here now, if that's okay. We've got Nicola here who's asking, we PR brands are that's good. We PR brands only interested in product placements. Notoriously competitive. How do we make it stand out?
So the brand is only interested in product placement, or the client?
I think they're feeling that they're feeling that the client brands are only interested in getting their products in the media, and obviously, how do they do that? How do they make it stand out?
The thing is that it's having a great product in the first place. That's what I often say to people. People are looking for it to try and get coverage for events, for example. I'm like, well, if your event's boring, you're not going to be able to get coverage of it. It starts with the product itself. And it's a case of, no amount of phoning or sending press releases. If your product isn't of interest or journalists have already written about it and there isn't anything new to say about it, they've already done it, they're not going to cover it. But, with if you've got, a CEO who's got, this is what I'm trying to get across in the webinar, say the CEO or the head honcho has got expertise in a particular area and you can get them out there talking about it and talking about your wider mission and values, you don't need to do the product placement because people are that sort of looks after itself because you're creating that kind of buzz around your brand and what you stand for. And sometimes it's a case of just being, I know it's really hard, just being really honest with your clients, just saying, look, we can't make journalists write about this stuff unless you either give us something new or we look at more creative ways to get coverage. And some of the things that I've mentioned as we've gone along, no amount of phoning, no amount of press releasing, no amount of chasing is going to make a journalist write about your product if they're not interested.
I know that we talked before the webinar about sort of specific industry questions and things like this, but and we've got some questions like that. We are going to get back to them, but I think we thought it was probably better to get back to them, maybe in a sort of more personal follow-up where we can sort of find out more. But there is one here which is absolutely fascinating because I'm going to read out in full. It's Clara here saying, "Hi Janet, I work for a peace building NGO, responding to conflict. We're leaders in the field of peace building, have years of experience and expertise. We would like journalists to be more aware of our work." But due to the nature of it, we can't disclose too much information about what we actually do. How do I assure journalists that we are experts with a wide network of contacts in conflict zones without disclosing confidential information?
That's a really
Sorry, I
good
put you on the spot there, haven't I? But
Yeah.
it's a very, very interesting question. I'm just really interested to get your thoughts on that.
Well, just off the top of my head, it's probably something I would need to think a little bit more about, and I'd need to know. I probably need to know who the company were and why it was so sensitive. I think sometimes building a bit of trust with journalists and saying to them, look, these are the kind of people we work for, but I hope you can understand why we can't say who they are. That can be one way of doing it. And also maybe, I don't know, giving journalists another, maybe producing a guide to peace or a kind of 20 lessons from work, some kind of product or something, or a book or an e-book or something like that, which so they've actually got reason to write about you, because like you say, it's kind of a bit woolly if you're saying, oh yes, well, we're experts in peace, but we can't say who we've worked for or something. But if you're doing a course on peace, if you're doing you've got some product like an e-book or a proper book or something like that, that might be a way of doing it. But again, I probably need to know who they were and a little bit more to answer a bit more less than generally, if you see what I mean. But most journalists, someone came to me and they said, I protect people all the time. I've got a story out today in the Guardian where, these people who've spoken to me, they said to me, look, we don't want our names to be revealed because otherwise we might lose our jobs. And I'm not going to, put somebody out there and make them lose their job. So as long as I can verify the story, then I'll still do it. So it's about sometimes just having those conversations with journalists and being prepared to give a little bit, again, which comes back to this service thing. You can't expect people to sort of trust you and trust your word if you're not willing to give a little bit. I hope that helps. That's totally off the top of my head, having no idea what it is that you do.
Janet, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. It's been really great, and I think delivered exactly what was promised. Straightforward tips within a sort of broader framework of thinking about this. You've heard about the job interview metaphor, the importance of understanding the plan. You've heard about the creative and empathetic approach preached by the likes of Belinda Palmer, and essentially sort of of course, the constant need to keep things simple, to not make the journalist's work, to make it as easy as possible. I'm summarising very briefly there, misled out. It's been a brilliant webinar. It will be available for everybody to listen to. If you keep those questions coming in, we talked about maybe doing some kind of cross post and maybe looking at some of these questions in a little more detail. Is that, Janet? Do you think that would be possible?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. All that remains, as we say, just you can see the sort of branding situation we're in at the moment, but keep tweeting us on Citizen UK this week. Website changing very soon. Facebook has already changed. We didn't expect Facebook to take us up on our request quite so early, but they have. So Facebook has already changed to the Vuelio brand. All Decision brands still good for now. It will be changing very soon if you want to get in touch with us. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Thanks to Pranker and John for producing today's session. Thanks to everyone at Ready Talk for helping out as well. And thanks most of all to Janet for an absolutely fantastic talk, and we'll be hopefully hearing more from her soon. Thank you very much everyone, and good morning.